What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with Fantasy Pros with my top 10 waiver wire list for week 7. Before I get into my list, if you want a chance to win a signed Christian Kirk Jacksonville Jaguars jersey, courtesy of bettingpros.com, your place to start betting smarter and not harder, you need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video, and that's it. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. Now let's go ahead and dive right in. Number 10, Josh Downs. Josh Downs' week was lower than I expected. 5 receptions on 8 targets for just 21 yards, and he got the touchdown. Pittman was still the alpha here. There is no question about that. Pittman saw a whopping 14 targets this week. But Downs was still a critical part of the offense, and although those targets weren't really productive, they at least existed, and you want a steady involvement within the offense. It's also important to note that Alec Pierce injured his shoulder. Pierce hadn't really seen a huge involvement from a target perspective, but he had played above 90% of snaps in every game this season, and his injury could increase snaps and opportunities for Downs. With Anthony Richardson out for an unknown duration, facing possible season-ending injury, Downs should continue to be the second favorite target of Gardner Minshew. Number 9, Rashied Rice. Rice was on my waiver wire list last week, and he returns for the exact reason that he was on there last week. He is the most reliable fantasy option in Kansas City's receiving corps, and we cannot ignore a rookie putting up this level of production in a Kansas City Chiefs offense. Rice's production is modest. He's typically seeing 4 to 5 targets a game, but he has a strong catch rate and 2 touchdowns on the season. Ultimately, none of the Chiefs receivers can be that top guy for Patrick Mahomes with Travis Kelce on the team. If I had to put my bets on any one of these receivers to separate themselves from the rest, it is Rashied Rice. Rice is an excellent bench stash and does have weekly low-end flex appeal for those dealing with bye-week issues or in deeper leagues. Number 8, Keon Ingram. Keon Ingram is towards the back of my list because I don't really think the Cardinals plan to give him a James Conner type of workload, and the schedule ahead doesn't really have enough good matchups to counteract the bad ones. Ingram had 10 carries for 40 yards and 2 receptions, while Jameson Williams had 8 carries for 36 yards and 1 reception. Ingram could be splitting work in games against teams that have performed well against the run. But still, you can look to add him on waivers because we know that Conner is out for at least 3 more weeks. But don't go spending a bunch of fab, this is a low priority add. Ingram is a guy that you can use if you're in deep leagues or you have bye week issues. Because remember, we did get bamboozled by Emari DeMarcado, so we're not going to make a massive investment on Ingram here, or any Arizona running back for that matter. Number 7, Jameson Williams. I was very surprised to see that Jameson Williams' roster percentage had dipped down. Jameson Williams was the number 1 waiver wire ad on my list a couple of weeks ago when his suspension was shortened. I warned that they weren't going to throw Williams into an aggressive workload immediately. And while he played last year at the end of the season, he never played more than 25% of snaps, and he had literally 1 catch last year. He also dealt with a hamstring injury this year during training camp, so he's still very new to the NFL. And we know how Detroit treats its young players. They are not going to give anyone an aggressive workload immediately. But you want to grab Williams and stash him because he's got huge big play upside, and that upside finally showed up this week. Williams got his first touchdown of the season, a 45-yard touchdown from Jared Goff. Still, not a high-volume game, but this is a big impact offense and a solid team. Williams will continue to have big opportunities. Amon-Ra St. Brown will remain the alpha, Josh Reynolds will stay involved, but Williams is a must-add if he is on your waivers. Number 6, Rashod Shaheed. Rashod Shaheed got off to a hot start with 9 receptions and 1 touchdown through the first 2 games, before cooling off to 3 straight games between 4 to 6 fantasy points. But we do have to account for the fact that those 3 games coincided with Derek Carr's shoulder injury. Carr had visibly struggled to throw the ball downfield while his shoulder was injured and had less than 200 passing yards in each of those games. So it makes sense that Shaheed, a huge deep ball threat, had terrible performances. And Carr looked to be fully recovered this week and had over 350 yards, and what do you know? Rashod Shaheed was a big beneficiary with 2 receptions on 6 targets for 85 yards and a touchdown, plus 2 carries for 18 yards. Shaheed is probably never going to be a high reception guy, but he's always one big play away from making your fantasy day. He's a potential flex option and a guy that you can plug in for huge upside when you've got tough matchups. As long as Derek Carr is healthy and at the helm, big plays are on deck for Rashod Shaheed. Number 5, Craig Reynolds. Another week, another handcuff pops off due to injury, and this week it was Craig Reynolds. David Montgomery suffered a rib injury, and while we don't know for sure what kind of time he'll be missing, we do know that Craig Reynolds would be the next man up. Jahmyr Gibbs missed his 2nd straight game dealing with a hamstring injury, and it doesn't seem like he was close to returning this week. The Lions also lost Zonovan Knight for the season. Reynolds' game was underwhelming, but the Bucs are a tough run defense. Even David Montgomery struggled when he was active. We have to also account for the possibility that Gibbs could return this week, so this isn't really an easy call. But we know that Dan Campbell, in what he likes to do, is just not simply give an aggressive workload to young players, especially ones coming off of a hamstring injury. I can't imagine that Gibbs comes off of this injury to something like 20 carries. Reynolds is going to be relevant for as long as Montgomery is out. Number 4, Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel was on my list last week, and he'll probably be on there again next week because no one really wants to buy into the reality that Curtis Samuel is factually the wide receiver 2 in the Washington offense, an offense that is very productive from a fantasy perspective. Jahan Dotson does run more routes, and it doesn't result in actual production, unfortunately. Samuel had 18 fantasy points in week 4 and in week 5 as well, and then 14 points in week 16. It's tough for fantasy managers to buy into Samuel as a weekly option, but he's a strong flex option. If you look at the schedule ahead for Washington, it's overall not very receiver friendly, but it's a bit deceiving for our purposes. That is highly influenced by a terrible playoff schedule, but the next month really isn't that bad. Over the next 5 weeks, there are multiple friendly matchups and ones where Washington will have to throw the ball. The volume will be there, and like it or not, Curtis Samuel is a strong fantasy asset. Number 3, Kareem Hunt. Before I dive into this is not a anti-Jerome Ford thing. Ford looked fantastic on Sunday. His runs were strong, his volume was good, he looked the part of a lead back. But Kareem Hunt's production in week 6 was very reminiscent of the old Kareem Hunt. 12 carries, 47 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 3 receptions, 24 yards. That is such a Kareem Hunt line. The yards per carry were disappointing, and they did pale in comparison to Jerome Ford, but it felt like the Browns were finally able to get back to the run production that has driven their success over the years. The Browns' offense has really been struggling to find consistency, particularly without Deshaun Watson, but they've got a string of good matchups coming up, and Hunt could work his way into being a weekly usable fantasy asset. Number 2, Jordan Mason. Christian McCaffrey suffered a hamstring injury, and we don't know the severity of that injury at this time. I film on Sunday night, so I don't have all of the details yet. So again, these players, these ones that are handcuffs that are popping up due to injury, they can move up and down in the rankings depending on the severity of their lead back's injury. But with the 49ers, we know that this team will likely be cautious with Christian McCaffrey because this is a real Super Bowl contending team. They cannot risk their biggest superstar on their team just to try and get in one extra game. We need to account for the possibility of CMC being out this week. This one is tough because this isn't a clear and definitive next man up situation. Elijah Mitchell has been the handcuff, but Mitchell missed 2 weeks and then came back in week 6 to just 2 carries for -3 yards. While he was missing in action, Jordan Mason stepped up and had a strong week 5 performance with 10 carries for 69 yards and a touchdown, and then 5 carries for 27 yards and a touchdown in week 6. There's just no way to know if the lack of availability caused Mitchell to fall out of favor with Kyle Shanahan. We've seen it happen before. Jordan Mason might have earned his right to be the next man up. But, like we saw with the Cardinals, a strong performance does not earn you the role to be a handcuff. Didn't happen with Amari DiMercato. So pay attention to the news here and stay alert to see if we can get any idea of which back will be the preferred lead back here for San Francisco. Number 1, Elijah Mitchell. We talked about it with Jordan Mason, so we don't have to deep dive into it, but yes, I am going back to Elijah Mitchell, because it's possible that the reduced role that we saw in week 6 was the result of Mitchell being eased into action. Elijah Mitchell was questionable heading into the weekend. And considering that the injury he was dealing with was a knee injury, maybe he just wasn't fully ready to go. Maybe they were just trying to work him in and get him, some level of play. It's easy to forget Mitchell's history with the 49ers because it's been injury-ridden. But Mitchell earned the RB1 role as a rookie after being a 6th-round draft pick. And when he was healthy, he did nothing but produce strong numbers. Then last year, he was immediately injured and then became the handcuff after the 49ers traded for Christian McCaffrey. But Mitchell was still very productive with his carries, played well in tandem with Christian McCaffrey. And for that reason, we have to assume that Mitchell will have first rights to the bulk of the workload if CMC is out. Mitchell is going to be the priority add over Mason unless I hear otherwise. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to Fantasy Pros. And remember, if you want a chance to win a signed Christian Kirk Jacksonville Jaguars jersey courtesy of bettingpros.com, your place to start betting smarter and not harder, you need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video and that's it. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize.